In this video, we're going to talk about how to disrupt a market when your no-code app idea isn't all that revolutionary. Now, in a previous video, we talked about how to grow and scale your app in a market that has already been disrupted. This one's a little bit different. We're going to be talking about how to actually disrupt a market, but with the caveat that your app idea just doesn't have to be all that new and revolutionary. So make sure you stick around until the end for this one, because this is one you're going to want to hear if you want to see a lot of growth for your no-code app. Now, first, if you're new around here, my name is Kristen, and I'm the co-founder of Coaching No-Code Apps, where we help business owners and industry experts build custom apps to either start their app-based businesses or grow their existing businesses, all without coding and with no technical background required. Now, you can join us at our free training over at coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop to get started with your app today. So the big question is, how do you disrupt a market without an idea that's all that revolutionary? Now, first, I want to put some context around what it means to disrupt a market. So essentially what we're talking about is taking an industry where processes have happened in a certain way, things have historically always been done in a certain way. And as a disruptor, you are coming in with an app, a product, a service that changes the way those things have historically been done. And when a market is disrupted, what you're going to see on the other side is lots of other apps, products, and services that might be complementary, might be competitive, might add on to that initial one in some way. All of those will come in and continue to expand and grow that disrupted market from there. So as the disruptor, what you're doing is you're changing industry practices, and you are opening up really a new market. Okay. Now, when you think about disrupting a market, there's a lot of opportunity there. Now, to be clear, you don't have to disrupt a market to be successful. Like I mentioned, we have another video that talks about being successful when you're not the disruptor. But if you do want to be the disruptor, there is, of course, a lot of opportunity that comes along with that. But when you think about disrupting a market, it can be intimidating. It can feel overwhelming because it seems like the idea has to be just out of this world, revolutionary, right? And when you look at markets that are disrupted, it can seem that way too. I mean, look at the no-code app space right now. Traditionally, the way to build an app is to code it, right? Or to hire a programmer. And when no-code tools became a thing, they disrupted that market and created a market of their own. And now in the no-code space, you see lots of different tools, lots of platforms, products, services, complementary, competing. The market is growing and expanding. Now, when you stop and you think about that, it can seem like, coming up with the idea to build apps without coding, how can you ever think of something like that on your own? It can feel intimidating, but that's what we're going to talk about today. You don't have to have an idea like that to be successful. So what we're going to do is jump over to the whiteboard, and we're going to draw this out here. So what we're looking at, right, is over on the left-hand side here. When you look at industries that have not been disrupted yet, there are processes that already exist. There are ways that things are being done that are currently in place. Okay, so for any type of existing industry that doesn't have a really big software presence. Okay, so if you're in this industry, you're probably not using an app to handle your processes, whether that's with business or in your personal life as a consumer. Okay, but there are going to be existing processes in place. All right, but instead of being an app, what you're going to see are things like spreadsheets, Okay, so maybe the processes that you handle in a certain industry traditionally happen via spreadsheets or just via written documentation. Okay, these are still processes, but they live within spreadsheets. Sometimes they just happen manually. Okay, so you see this in a lot of trade industries where people are maybe working out in the field or on the job or as contractors in some way. Things happen manually on pen and paper, sometimes on Post-it notes. Processes are still happening, they're just happening manually. Okay, you sometimes see employees, right? Businesses maybe hire employees to handle tasks right now. The processes, right? These tasks are still being handled in some way. They're just being done so by staff, by extra staff within a company. Sometimes you also see outdated software. Okay, so this is kind of an extra because we're talking about markets or industries that haven't been disrupted with the use of applications. But in some industries, you are going to see disruption still happening when the industry currently uses really outdated software that is maybe not widely available. It might cost a lot. It might just really actually be outdated in the sense that it doesn't handle processes in the way that they need to be handled. Okay, so when you look at existing industries, and there are tons of industries in the world that don't have a much of any or any at all app presence, we're looking at industries that have not been disrupted by applications, but we're looking at industries that do have existing processes in place for the way things are handled. Okay. Now, when we're looking at disrupting a market, and you're thinking about, how do I come up with this revolutionary app idea? Some of the things that can hold you back from pursuing that are, number one, the obvious, just thinking about that idea or thinking of that idea in the first place. But number two, the validation, right? So when you are trying to disrupt a market, it can feel like you're really just stepping out on a limb, because even though it can feel like a negative thing to have competition in the market you're in, competition actually serves as validation that there's a need for the type of app that you're building. So when there's not competition, when there aren't other competing apps in the market, it can kind of feel like you are just shooting in the dark and wondering, how do I actually validate the need for this seemingly random app idea that I might have come up with, right? So that's what disrupting a market can feel like. It's not what you want it to feel like. It can feel a lot differently, and it can be a lot more practical. So going back to our drawing here, if we're looking at industries that, again, don't have a current app presence, they are going to have these processes in place. Now, what you can do instead of having that revolutionary idea that you might have trouble validating is you can simply replace these processes or improve these processes with an application. So what happens is, in these industries that haven't yet been disrupted by applications, right? They have these spreadsheets, the manual processes, the staff, potentially the outdated software. But the problem is all of these cost a lot. They're expensive, if not for the, hiring the people to do it or paying for this really outdated software. It can cost a lot in manual error. It can cost a lot just in time, right? Time spent working with these spreadsheets, time spent filling out lots of paper documentation, for example. So it can be expensive, and it can also take a lot of time. That's my clock there. So when you are thinking about disrupting a market without all that revolutionary of an app idea, what you can do really is take these, right, and create an app that, again, replaces, enhances, changes in some way, automates these processes, right? So you can take people away from the spreadsheets. You can take people away from the manual work. You can remove the need for certain types of employees or staffing, so that if it's a business process, these companies can focus their investments elsewhere, right? You can remove the need for, if there is some sort of really outdated old software, you can bring that to the present and really just streamline things, optimize things, okay? And when you do this, when you create an app that can replace all of these existing alternatives, okay, they're not apps, but they are existing alternatives in that they are processes that exist to solve the problem that your app will now solve, right? When you do that, you're able to usually lower the cost a lot. That's why a lot of people turn to applications, is because they can lower their costs, and or they can lower time spent, right? So you can get yourself out of the manual work. You can get yourself out of the spreadsheets. You can get yourself out of having to lose a bunch of money due to human error in your processes, or lose a bunch of time, that kind of thing. Okay, so this is really the disruptor, right? This can be your app. And again, the benefits here are you can disrupt a market, right? If you have identified, or maybe you work within, or you're a consumer in an industry that doesn't have a very big or existing at all app presence, but there are existing alternatives, processes that currently do handle tasks, right? You can just replace those. The validation is there, right? Now you have validation, because again, it can feel intimidating to think about disrupting a market, because it's the idea is usually new, right? But it doesn't actually have to be, right? Your validation lives in these existing processes. You know there's a need because the processes already exist. You're just changing them with an application. So you have the validation, and you really, I mean, again, your idea just doesn't have to be all that revolutionary, because the processes are already there, the ideas are already there, the solutions are already there. You're just replacing them with an app. Now, what will happen is, when you bring these industries into the present, when you replace all of these really tedious, costly, time-consuming processes with your app, then you will likely see market expansion. So you're going to see other players, if you want to call them that, come onto the market. And these other players will be other apps. They might be competing apps. They'll be services, right? They might be a combo of apps and services. They're going to be, complementary. They're going to be competing. This is market expansion. The market has been disrupted. Now others are going to see the benefits of this, and they're going to come into the market too. Now this kind of goes back to our other video that we've talked about, how to scale and grow within a market that's already been disrupted. But you're going to see these come in, and you're also going to see those existing alternatives still stick around. They don't have to go anywhere, right? The spreadsheets, the manual processes, the staffing, the outdated software, those are still existing alternatives. And for some users of those processes, they might not want to change. They might be stuck in those, and those might be just fine. They might work for them. They might be happy with them. So those can still be in the market, and that's okay, right? But this is where we see market expansion. And what's pretty cool is once that happens, you're going to have people who want the lower cost option, who want the option that, saves them the time. And you're going to have people who might still want the higher cost option and want the option that maybe just does take a little more time, like I just mentioned. And when the market expands, you're now going to see these available more so on a spectrum. Okay, so you're going to have alternatives, existing alternatives, new apps, new products, new services, all of this that span anywhere along this spectrum. Now, what happens then, and we won't get too deep into this, but as the disruptor, that's not a bad thing. This is just a thing that allows you to now differentiate your own app, your own product and or service even more. Now, we have another video where we talk about ways that you can differentiate yourself. But the reason why I want to bring this up is because it can seem a little bit intimidating sometimes to think about, okay, yes, maybe I'm going to disrupt a market because I have an app that can replace any of these existing processes, or I have an app that could potentially bring this industry into the present and carry it into the future. But if I launch this and then a bunch of other apps or services come onto the market, then what am I going to do, right? That can feel intimidating, but it's not a bad thing. And it's actually, if you think about it, it's really a good thing, because it means that, there's a saying that, a rising tide lifts all ships. And when you have a lot of market activity and a lot of growth in the market, that means there are more eyes on the market. That means there are more people coming to these types of solutions, which means more eyes on you. Okay, now this gives you an opportunity to differentiate, like I mentioned. And you can differentiate in a lot of different ways. So we'll talk about a few of them here. I won't go too in depth because we have another video on this, but you can differentiate in terms of your market segment. We see this with growing businesses, app-based businesses a lot, where you can come into the market serving a potentially a large segment or segments of the market, and maybe narrow down over time. Or maybe you start really narrow and maybe you widen out over time. Or maybe you start with a certain segment and then you realize you are better equipped to serve a different segment in a better way. So maybe you start to differentiate yourself with your market segment. You can differentiate yourself with your app's features, potentially. You can differentiate on things like price, or the amount of time it takes for certain processes to happen. You can differentiate with both of those things, right? This goes back to the spectrum up here that we touched on a little bit. You can differentiate on things like your customer service, how you work with your customers, your users, potentially your clients. If your app serves people more on a client type of basis, you can differentiate your brand and differentiate based on your experience, what you personally bring to the table when you're providing your users with a solution. So hopefully this is helpful for you. I know we've covered a lot here, but what I want you to understand is first of all, you don't have to be a disruptor in a market in order to be successful. You just don't have to be, right? You can be very successful. For example, if you are, somewhere over here, and that is okay. But if you do want to be in here and you do want to be the disruptor, it doesn't have to be as complicated as it can seem, okay? And if you're in a position to do this, then you have a really good opportunity in front of you, because you can be the solution that takes this, high cost, really time consuming, the current way things are being done in an industry, that takes all of these things and opens up a brand new way of doing things with an application. And you can do this using no-code tools. Our clients are doing this all the time. And that's what's really cool, is that not only can you open up availability of a better solution and better solutions, right? Because you can play a part in bringing other solutions to the market too. Not only can you do that, but you have availability as a non-technical founder to do this with no-code tools. You don't have to go and invest, $200,000 just on the minimum viable product of this alone. You can actually do this. You have the capability to do this. So I hope this is helpful in helping, in kind of guiding you on how to frame this a little bit differently, on how to think about being a disruptor, on how to think about taking advantage of opportunities like this that are available to you, and they are readily available to you. So again, I hope this was helpful. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.